So what I have found in the work that I've done is that the number one thing that we can do to be able to demonstrate that empathy, assuming that we want to do it, is to listen with purpose, right? Which is a different type of listening than many of us think. Again, we talked before about listening to fix, right? Or listening to give advice, listening to interrupt, listening to get them onto the next task, as opposed to, no, this is a time for you just to listen, to show people that you understand them and care how they feel. And that is a different type of listening. Again, as I do exercises and workshops with leaders around this, and they have the experience, like, what was that like to listen?
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by an expert and practitioner of leadership, a gentleman after my own ilk. It is Alain Hunkins. He is the author of Cracking the Leadership Code. He is a coach certified in multiple leadership and team development disciplines, and has been doing this for a good spell, over 20 years, of working with Fortune 1000 companies, road warrior, and has seen it in the for-profit, not-for-profit, government sectors, brings a tremendous amount of perspective and insight. And today we're going to be taking a deeper dive on one of the fundamentals of leadership, which is connection. Specifically, how do we integrate empathy and accountability? And we're going to use that word integrate very intentionally. It's not balancing. It's not a trade-off. It's really about bringing both of those skills together to bring out the best of our organizations. So great to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Lee. Thanks so much. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah. Now, you're based out of Western Massachusetts. So tell us a little bit more about what you're currently doing.
All right. Well, currently, I'm actually doing a lot of work with a group called Vistage. It's a CEO peer advisory network, if you're familiar with Vistage. So I was voted the top new speaker of Vistage for this past year, which opened up lots of doors. So they love to have me. And one of the things I'm really enjoying is these are small groups. When I say small, we're talking like 14 about CEOs, right? And senior C-suite executives in small to mid-sized companies. But one of the things I'm really enjoying is getting to know their world and their business and their issues. Because like you said, I'm a practitioner. And so seeing what are the trends, what's going on, I'm really fascinated by those sorts of things and really figuring out. And so I think that's going to play very much into our conversation today around the integration of empathy and accountability.
Excellent. No, that is definitely a great organization. I brushed with them a few times, definitely on my radar for future consideration. So I'll have to figure out what you did to crack their leadership code. So I one day too can be the best new speaker in their circuit. So but how did you get into this? I mean, guys like you and I, it's kind of odd for us to be doing this for 20 plus years. I know I'm pushing about 26-ish or so. I think you're 27, so you got me by like a year. Back when I started, people were like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, why are you getting a degree in leadership? What is this leadership thing you speak of? Like, that's not practical. You're going to be unemployed and starving. What got you into this whole space that leadership is a skill set that can be learned and developed?
It is. And it's interesting. You mentioned about potentially being unemployed and starving. Well, I came to this field from a field where people are more starving and more unemployed. So I actually trained, I have an MFA as an actor. So I trained as a professional actor.
Starving student to hungry actor, man, but they say hunger breeds motivation. So, wonder your soul.
It's what I was interested in. And here's the thing. I'm going to share this pivotal light bulb moment that happened for me. So it was between summers of grad school. I was living in Milwaukee where I was going to school at the time. And I got a call from a temp agency that I had signed up with. They said, hey, Eli, you're an actor. You can run a video camera, right? So just to date myself here, we're talking 1992, 93. So we're talking VHS, big cassettes. For you youngins, go Google what we're talking about if you're not familiar. Anyway, so they said, yeah, we'll pay you $9 an hour to go and run this camera. You're going to meet this guy, Mr. Marshall, in the lobby of this corporate office building. And they said, dress appropriate. Like, What do I wear? So anyway, I go and meet this guy, Mr. Marshall, in the lobby of this building. Turns out this guy, Mr. Marshall, was a guy named Tom Marshall. And in a coincidence of coincidences, Tom and I went to undergrad together. He was a transfer student. He was about 10 years older than me. So I was probably about 23 at the time. So he's 33. And he's working for a company called the Executive Technique. And so what they're doing is they're teaching presentation skills to business leaders. And I'm there to videotape them because part of the learning is they're going to watch the feedback in real time. Like, here, you just did this. Let's pick apart what you just did. All right. And so I'm there doing this all. And on the first or second break, I said, hey, Tom, come here. Tom, you're teaching these folks, you're teaching them acting skills. He said, yeah, but we don't call it that because they think it's just this froofy, artsy stuff if we called it that. It's presentation skills. And that was the moment that I realized that so many of the skills that I had learned in theater were actually transferable, but I couldn't call them theater skills. And it's interesting because now, here I am 28 years later, what I ended up finding was, and look, I obviously had to learn a lot about business along the way. So it isn't just like acting, like boom, right? We missed the middle part of that story. However, that being said, I am firmly committed to the idea that leadership at its core is a performing art, that it boils down to behavior. It's what you say, it's what you do, it's how you say it, how you do it. It also means what you don't say and what you don't do, because that sends a message. So it's that self-awareness, much in the way that a director would see what's going on stage from the audience to see what's the impact this is having. What leaders need to learn how to do is understand leadership isn't about what you intend, it's the impact that you're having. And so what do you need to do to close that gap and learn and embed these habits to be more effective in what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I definitely am anchoring on what you're sharing there. I mean, you and I, again, both have gone through some of the similar trainings and programs, but, you look at things like the Leadership Challenge with Guzes and Posner, and, they're like, ultimately it's behavior, right? That's the bridge.
In the Leadership Challenge with Guzes and Posner, the first principle is model the way. If you don't believe the messenger, you won't believe the message. So how we show up, and like ultimately, leadership development is personal development. You can't separate out the leader from the person. And that means we have to learn a lot about ourselves, but also learn a lot about just human beings. Because I don't care what industry we work in, you're in the people business first, because everything gets done in and through people. I was talking with this group of CEOs this past week, and we were talking about this idea of, are you focused on the people? Are you focused on the numbers? And my belief is that every single thing that we measure in our businesses, every single thing, I don't care what business we're in, and you and I both have businesses, so we measure lots. Every single thing we measure is only the lagging indicator of the behavior of a person, right? And so we have to really think about people and how do we help people to perform at their best.
Well, I mean, similarly, we're working on some really large change management initiatives, for healthcare organizations, government agencies, things of that nature. And they're like, they're talking about the technology and the data and the systems and the policies and this, that, and the other. I'm like, going, you guys, this all boils down to somebody doing a behavior differently. And they're like, that's way oversimplified. And I'm like, but that's where the magic happens when somebody interacts with a dashboard or a patient or a plan or whatever it is in this context, right? And it's like, it's somebody doing something different than they haven't done, typically before. And so it's just so we have to isolate what is the behavior, that you'd like to see changed. And that's where transformation comes from. Now it's easier said than done. That is 100% true. But that is a moment of transformation. And leaders are all about trying to elicit, inspire, sustain, reinforce, redirect behaviors, right? So it's really, really good. Now, when you say a performing art, though, I want to address something that's already starting to pop up in our listeners' minds. I know it for a fact. They're like, performing arts, you mean it's fake? I thought authenticity was the key to leadership. And I have one of my employees, I can say his name. His name's Wayne, great guy. He has one of my favorite quotes, which is, sincerity is the key to success. And once you learn how to fake that, you got it made. So tell us about, before we get into the integrating empathy and accountability, help us integrate performing arts and authenticity, right? Because I'm sure that gets in people's minds and gets in the way.
Well, this is the thing, right? And people think about actors, for example. They think, oh, they're just faking it. I mean, the study, the craft of acting is actually learning how to be genuine and authentic in a very scripted controlled environment. And if you think about it, at work, if you're a leader, you're playing a role, right? You're not the CEO when you're hanging out with your friends that you've known since you were 8. They're not looking, they're like, no,
Then you're the class clown, right? Or you're at church, right? You're not the CEO at church. You are, very studious, very.
you play a different role. And so here's the thing. And so recognizing that the reason that human brains developed the way they did is we are social primates and we have an incredibly good BS detector. So you can't fake this. So if you think you're going to game the system and work, because like we can all tell if someone's gone off to a course and they come back and say like, how are you today? And they have that weird, like, I don't actually care how you are, but someone told me to ask you this question so I can check it off my task list. It's not going to work. So it's got to be genuine. And believe it or not, all of that sense of being genuine, these are behaviors that can get broken down and practiced. Much in the same way, if you have a workout regimen and you go to the gym and you work your legs and your shoulders and your back and your chest and your biceps, you can build these skills. It's just most of us have no clue as to how to go about doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like building muscle. I mean, my lovely wife is a huge fitness aficionado. She's prepping for a show here in a couple of weeks. So, she's in those final stages of, cutting and working on all those things. And, when you're building those muscles, you're going to be sore. It's going to feel awkward at first, right? You're like, this is not right. I wasn't meant to do this, and then, but having a good coach who can guide you in the proper technique. So you build the muscle without as much injury. Right. But you don't get to skip a little bit of the discomfort with building those skills. So my message is that awkwardness when you first start trying to do something different as a leader, for example, as we're trying to apply some of the things you're going to be sharing with us today, that awkwardness is not a sign that it's not working. It's not a sign that you can't do it. It's not a sign that you shouldn't do it. It's a sign that you're on the right track to coming up with a new skill set and having a bigger impact. Like you said, not just great intentions. So work through it.
Well, I love what you said there, Lee, because I find this, I'm always on this journey of learning and growing. And, being an entrepreneur, there's always a new development. And one thing I've had to learn to reframe is that, that feeling in my, oh crap, feeling in my stomach. And I used to be like, oh, anxiety. And now I've learned to understand that feeling. I'm like, oh, this is what learning feels like. I've never done this before. So of course it feels different. And so learning to reframe some of what we think of as humans have a hard time getting okay with discomfort. And I think if you're going to be a good leader, you've got to get at least a little bit comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's the growing edge and that's really where the magic happens.
Yeah, my dad had mentioned we have his celebration of life this week. It was a huge leadership mentor. He's the one who got me on all of this stuff, right? Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar, all those guys in the back in the day. But being a military guy, they have an expression which is called "embrace the suck," right? And it's like just embrace the suck. Like that is the moment of breakthrough. That is the moment of impact. That is not to be run away from. That is to get gleeful and giddy about. Because that's when the magic happens. So let's embrace a little bit of the suck here. So leaders have that moment where employees are getting all emotional, and they're trying to use some of those Hollywood lines like it's not personal, it's just business. And we're trying so hard, and I think many of us from older and different models of leadership, especially going back to the industrial age, they're trying to remove the human elements, right? Like, no, we're just machines. Just do what I say. It's a transaction. I pay you. You follow me. The incentive plan is do what I say today, get to come back tomorrow. Like all those things, right? And we're trying so hard to separate that out, and we get frustrated when the humanity's in there. And I think your reframing is like, dude, that's the juice. That's the power. That's what you want. Now the question is, how do you harness it and then unleash it? But empathy, this is a squishy, touchy feely word. What business does it have in business?
Yeah. So the business that empathy has in business, I just want to back up because you went through some stuff that I think people kind of get conceptually, but they don't really understand. This is my experience. And so I want to do a slightly deeper dive into like how we got here. How did we get to this idea of, because a lot of us as leaders, we're still living out the inherited leadership legacy from not too many generations ago, smack dab in the industrial age thinking. So let me give you an example. So we're all familiar with Henry Ford, right? The founder, CEO of Ford Motor Company. So Henry Ford famously said of his employees, he said, "Why is it every time I want a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached?" Okay. So back in Henry, and he could say this because in his world and in the workplace of the Ford Motor Company, you didn't actually want employees thinking. So just imagine whether it's Lucille Ball on the assembly line with the cookies, or modern times Charlie Chaplin. It's literally show up and do the manual labor. So Henry Ford, most famous car to come off the Ford assembly line was the Model T. They did not change a single iota of so there's no upgrades, no next version. The Model T was the Model T for over 20 years.
Yeah. They didn't. It wasn't the Model T, 1938 edition. It was the Model T.
It was a Model T, and they kept, so business cycles were slow, and you didn't want your employees going, "I want to innovate around this assembly." No, you wanted them to shut up, and do their job. Like, you just wanted conformity and compliance. And the idea was, I'm the leader. I tell you what to do, and your job is to shut up and do it. That worked to a point. That worked okay back then. But how many of us, first of all, you're here 20 years, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I wish things around here didn't change every 20 minutes." I mean, the world that we live in is so different. And also, all of that kind of repetitive work has now been turned into an algorithm or a computer program or AI or robot. People aren't doing that mindless repetition, right? And so all that gets plugged into a spreadsheet can fill that out for you, and just look at that. So what that leaves for humans to do is to think, is to bring their brains to work. And what we, believe it or not, brains are attached to bodies, and bodies have feelings. And the research shows very clearly how we feel profoundly influences how we perform. And if you don't want to believe the research, I invite you, listener, just to think about your own experience. On those days that you are doing your best work, we can call it performing at your best, what are some of the feelings that are associated with that? When I've asked that question to dozens and dozens of groups, the words I get back are things like, "I feel happy, I feel in the zone, I feel enthusiastic, energized." So I've never, ever, ever had someone say, "On those days when I'm performing at my best, I feel frustrated, I feel hopeless, I feel anxious, I'm stressed out." So that should tell you something. And the research also shows that the number one thing that makes people more engaged and more productive at work is, do they feel valued and cared for by their immediate supervisor? Look,
Not the CEO,
not the CEO.
Oh, yeah.
It's by your boss. It's by your boss, by your direct manager, your lead, whatever word you want to use. That next level up has to feel, you have to feel valued and cared. Now, if there was ever a soft and fuzzy metric, I mean, that sounds like a flippin' Hallmark card, right? I mean, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But it's true. And just, again, don't take the research word for it. Just think about, if you've worked for two different leaders in the same company, think about how different experience you had based on who they were and how much you felt valued and cared for. It's so humanly basic and fundamental. And yet we don't give it a whole lot of visibility, because doesn't show up directly on the bottom line.
Yeah. It's like fertilizing the soil. You're like, how does that relate to the fruit? And you're like, well, there is a delay, but it is absolutely correlated. And I think, just look at the word emotion, right? Like, it's emotion, that's power. That's where you get the movement from. And I think, in the time that I've been doing this, I'm sure you've seen this too, is that I think mindsets have shifted to say, okay, I get it. It's important. I get it. It's a part of the equation. I need to stop running from it. I really want to embrace it. So I think where a lot of leaders are right now, especially those listening to this particular episode, is they're like, okay, yeah, you don't have to sell me that it's important, but I'm struggling with how to do it, right? Like, in the moment, I've got this person, and, they call it innovation. I call it horsing around, right? They're generating defects. They're messing up. They're not doing it right. They're wasting time. And I'm getting frustrated. How about my feelings, right? I'm feeling frustrated. And so then they're like, but then what about accountability? And I think right there, that's the moment of like, okay, let's grab that moment and say, there's an opportunity here for us to really up our practical skills, to be able to show the empathy, in integration with still being able to coach, guide, uplift, skill, whatever the word is, for your people. So let's zoom in on the empathy side a little bit, because you've cracked it. I mean, it sounds like you have to be born with it, and if you're not born with it, you're kind of screwed. I know that's not true. Tell us a little about what is the actual behaviors of empathy and how do we integrate it at work?
Sure. So, my simple definition of empathy is showing people that you understand them and care how they feel. So, there's two pieces to that. One you can call cognitive empathy, it's perspective taking. It's like, oh, my puppy is sick. Okay, maybe you don't have a puppy, but you can imagine what it would feel like if this dog or a friend or a person, if something, trying to understand things from their perspective, this means something to them, and to feel what it might feel like to them. So that's that. So that's the cognitive piece, perspective taking. But the other piece is the affective empathy or emotional piece. It's like, oh, how can I reach out to you and show you that I care, right? And it's interesting because showing people that you care does not mean you have to fix this for them. And I think there's so many people in leadership roles who are really excellent fixers, and they feel like they're obligated to, oh, something's going wrong, like, do you have a vet? I can find this. Or do you need time off? Like, it's like, that's not what we're at. The level of empathy, it's really just, first of all, affirming you're human, you're dealing with stuff, I hear that, I see that, I acknowledge that. Now, where we go from that, it depends on the situation. So there's no one thing. So it starts with this idea of showing people that you understand them and care how they feel. Now, again, that sounds pretty basic, and we think, oh, I do that. Well, a lot of us do it in life. A lot of us have a harder time doing it at work, because at work, you have to add in all of the demands that a workplace has, such as deadlines, limited resources, pressures, etc. And then suddenly empathy, so when I ask leaders, what do you see as the biggest barriers to leading with empathy? Number one is time. It's like, let's face it, so much in our digital workplaces to happen at the speed of light. But to show people you understand them and care how they feel, you have to slow down. You have to move at the speed of humans and give people a little bit of, we'll call it psychological air.
Couple of heartbeats, yeah, that's not going to be, a nanosecond.
And the fear is we've got all this work to get done. We don't have time for this feeling stuff.
This will crowd out the work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And realize that actually this is going to impede their ability to do the work, both the quantity as well as the quality of the work. So it's actually the wisdom that there's a time and a place to go slow, and then there's a time and a place to go fast, and to know which to do when. And that's a skill and an art to be able to do that.
Well, that distinction there, time and place, right? Time and place. There's a time to be directive. There's a time to be, coaching. There's a time to be just curious and just be like, I wonder where this is going to go. And I think that, but you mentioned two limiting beliefs, because behind every behavior is a belief, right? And that's one of the things I like to look at. And so you mentioned two of them. One is when somebody's going through what we might call a hard time, right? Either at work, at home, whatever. You could tell they're not in their peak zone. One belief is to be helpful is to fix it, is to remove the source of pain. And again, time and place, right? There is a time and a place to do that. I think one of the beliefs that leaders can have is like, well, good leaders fix problems. And again, that's a limiting belief. It's like, well, that's partially true. It's just incomplete. Maybe, especially in a type 2 or a type 3 leadership situation, maybe they need this discomfort in order to break free of old habits to be able to grow into something new. So maybe your job as leaders is exactly the opposite, is not to fix it. It's to hold the space and be like, yeah, this is going to be really uncomfortable for a little while. And I got to do that with humanity, with compassion, all those things. But, it's the opposite of fixing. And that's really what it is to help somebody. So I think that was one example you shared. I think the other one you mentioned was time, right? The belief that, if I spend time on this, it's a fixed pie, and that will put me that much further behind on the other things. And again, there's a degree of truth to that. It's not completely false. But I think what we have to do is, like you said, shift it to look at what's that return on investment, right? Investing this time, will this investment of time generate a higher long-term return than doing another email? Right. And I think when we make a comparison of returns versus just the cost of the seconds, I think that puts leaders in a better place for both of those limiting beliefs to punch through. So I just, you mentioned them quick, but I'm like that, those are some big ones that absolutely stop people dead in their tracks.
Absolutely. And, Lee, mentioned this idea of kind of an investment versus a cost. And this is another wrinkle in the equation that I want to bring out, because I think this is true for a lot of leaders. And I asked them, I said, so how many of you, these are people who are in formal leadership roles, how many of you, in addition to your formal leadership of leading other people in the organization, also wear an individual contributor hat where you're trying to get your own project work done?
Have you ever seen somebody not raise their hand?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say maybe one person out of thousands. I mean, again, it's like 99.9% are like, yep. So we're wearing these two things. And so I think there's this constant tension that people have is like, yeah, I want to be here and support you and be your leader, but I got my stuff to do too. And right now, and so they feel like this is costing me time. And I really do counsel and coach leaders. You've got to think of this, got to reframe that. It's not a cost, it is an investment. Because let's face it, a good, even 10, 15-minute interaction, connection with a leader can set someone on a different trajectory for the next 40 hours. And the converse is also true, right? Not having those kind of connection points can leave people treading water and floundering. And so I just wanted to bring that into the equation too, because I think a lot of listeners, you're going, I resemble that remark. Yeah.
I got my things to do too. And my original career background, you were acting. I was medical, so I was an ambulance EMT, lifeguard kind of person. So it was like, man, time. I mean, time is precious, right? And I've seen people leave young. I've seen them leave old. We all know we all have a fixed amount of it, right? So it's like the one thing you cannot, squander and then get back, right? Period. There's just no two ways about it. But even then, they taught us that, you're responding to a heart attack. You are 911. Your lights blazing. You don't rush things, because when you rush things, you make mistakes, and then people, die because of you, not because of the situation. And so being purposeful, being focused, being deliberate, even in emergencies, is still what's called for. And if we can say that that's true when, somebody's having a heart attack, then we could probably say it's true when you've got an urgent deadline for an email looming over you, which is not as serious as a heart attack. But it doesn't mean you lollygag, doesn't mean you're every day I'm shuffling, right? You move with a purpose, for sure. But I think that's the balance there that we're talking about with time. Good. So your definition of empathy, I love how you've got two components to it. Almost everything in life has a yin and a yang, right? There's that polarity. So there's the cognitive, you said, just to remind us again, cognitive for being able to understand what they're going through. And then the affective, which is to be able to express care. And like you said, care doesn't mean that you're going to fix it. Care also doesn't mean you agree with it. I think that's, it just means you care. Right. Maybe in that situation, you would be totally different than that person. That's fine. That's diversity. I'm cool with that, but I still care, so those don't cost you a whole lot of time, and they don't cost you a whole lot of anxiety. And so now you've kind of put the key in the lock. Haven't turned it yet, but you put the key in the lock. Right now, how do we turn it to kind of unlock that, that bottleneck that's happening in that moment of emotional distress, and you're trying to show up as a leader?
So what I have found in the work that I've done is that the number one thing that we can do to be able to demonstrate that empathy, assuming that we want to do it, is to listen with purpose, right? Which is a different type of listening than many of us think. Again, we talked before about listening to fix, right? Or listening to give advice, listening to interrupt, listening to get them onto the next task, as opposed to, no, this is a time for you just to listen, to show people that you understand them and care how they feel. And that is a different type of listening. Again, as I do exercises and workshops with leaders around this, and they have the experience, like, what was that like to listen? I was totally engaged with them. I wasn't thinking about the next thing. I was, we like to say, being present, right? And being present, let's face it is the most precious and scarce resource that we have. And so how do you start to strengthen the muscle of being present around other people? This is something that I have done over years and years, so that muscle is much stronger. A lot of people have a hard time with that. They don't know how to do that. In fact, interestingly enough, I was with a group a couple of weeks ago, with a group of CEOs, and one of the CEOs said to me, I got some feedback about my lack of presence. I said, what happened? He said, it wasn't from one of my employees. It was from my wife. So he said, we were talking, and she said, what's this? And I said, what's what? And she went, "What's this?" And what I hadn't realized was that I physically, when she was talking to me, I was doing this with my hand. I was like, "Can you get to the point already?" Which is, as we all hear, that we can laugh and
That is a fantastic technique. I'm writing that one down.
yeah,
That is going to
yeah,
save me so much
get
time.
you.
I'm so glad you shared that. Just like, honey, just get to the point,
Just
right?
get to
Yeah.
the point. So he was like, "Oh my gosh,
For listeners, and they're
yeah,
not
you
seeing
can't
it.
see it. Yeah,
He's waving his hand like
I'm waving my hand in a circle, like, come on already, won't you get to the point? Come on."
trying to paddle to the point. Yeah.
So when I share this with groups, we can all have a good laugh at his expense and go like, "Oh my gosh, I would never do that." And of course, you and I and most of us
Dude,
would.
I have done it. I'll
But
own it.
here's
Yeah.
the thing: is we would never do it maybe physically with our hands. But when I ask how many of you do this in your minds, and everybody cops to it, like we all do this, right? And so it's that ability to slow down, breathe, show up, be present for somebody else. And the other thing is people say, "Oh my gosh, but what about if they go on and on and on?" So I'm also a big fan, and this comes, we start moving into integrating to accountability. I'm a big fan of time capping things. So when I do this workshop and I have, like I say, a group of 15 people, we go around and share something and we ask people to listen with purpose. Each person gets 90 seconds. And I tell them up front, I have my stopwatch here. And by the way, when I put my hand, and I'm raising my hand right now for those who can't see me, when I'm waving at you, I'm not saying hi. I'm saying you're at 90 seconds. It's time to wrap up. And so we need to take back time. And a way we do that is very cleanly set some time boundaries about what things take. Because again, that is our most precious resource. And so this leads into the sense of how do we bring, because people go, "Yeah, okay, I get empathy, but it can't be only empathy all the time." Because if all we have is empathy, we're not running a business, we're leading an adult daycare center.
Well, and again, to your point, you could have it's a 25-minute one-on-one, and you're at the 23 mark, and they're still telling you the backstory, right? Like that you've gone past the point of diminishing returns on empathy now, and so now it's not integrated. And we call it the interruption rule, by the way. Like, what is the proper amount of time where it is? Because to interrupt is disrespectful. I mean, the question, but to go on a monologue is also disrespectful. So, so we define it as it's like before 90 seconds, or maybe it's 60 seconds, maybe it's 2 minutes. You pick your rule. You probably research is where you probably get when you're 90. So I like 90. But it's like 90 is enough time to show you respect to listen. Going after 90, it's respectful for me to say, "May I have a turn?" Right. And I think that is respect, literally quantified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much that kind of sense of give and take and how important. Because look, we've all had that friend or that person that we met, and you ask them a question, and then for the next 30 minutes, they don't stop. And then even if they stop and ask you a question, they turn it back to them and they keep going. And you're just like, "Oh, I feel used in this moment. I feel used. My life energy has been sucked away."
Or even assaulted. You're just like, "Man, I've got some friends that are very strong introverts. I'm a mild extrovert, so I could do my thing, and then I fill up. And so, yeah, you're like, literally, it's just overwhelming, and it become actually painful as a recipient. So I think, again, having respect for being a two-way thing, is appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. So that really leads then to the question of, okay, so let's assume you want to be empathetic. Let's assume that you've practiced the skills of empathy. You've learned how to listen with purpose. And okay, so then the question is,
a solid 90 seconds.
Yeah, you got a solid 90 seconds. So now the question becomes, what next? Because like you said, how do we integrate? And so this is where the sense of accountability comes in. And to me, the key to of useful, because I ask a lot of leaders and they get stuck on like, what does it mean to hold people accountable? And a lot of them don't know how to answer that question. Like, what is accountability? What does it mean? And I teach stuff around accountability too. And I basically say, where do you think the word accountability comes from? And I say, there's a clue. It's in the word.
It's in the word to count, right?
It comes from accounting. And I say, any accountants in the room? All right, you don't have to be an accountant to answer the question, but everyone familiar with the balance sheet? Yeah. And so we have, here's a piece of paper, put a big vertical line down the middle. On the one side, we have assets. On the other side, we have liabilities, right? Okay. And so in a balance sheet, when you get to the final tally, the two sides have to equal each other. That what's your assets equals your liabilities. Your inflow is outflow, right? All that's there. Everyone goes, got it, makes sense, right? So let's take it out of the world of accounting and let's put accountability, that same premise, into the world of leadership. On the one side, what it means is what I promise or what I say I'm going to do. And the other side is what I did. And so when I do what I say I got to do, I'm accountable. Yeah, exactly. Intention, action, promise, action. All that stuff. Whatever words exactly, but that's the general principle is what I say I'm going to do, what I actually did. And it should be that clear in black and white. And the thing is, we can't hold someone accountable to something that they weren't clear on what they actually promised. And this is the so and again and kind of expecting people to do something that is clear in your mind but hasn't been talked about. The analogy I sometimes use, it's kind of like going into a marriage. Maybe this is a little not a great analogy, but you get the essence of just like, I just hope it's going to go all well. But the fact you're going to have some bumps in the road. And what are you going to do? In any relationship, there's going to be bumps in the road because they're not you. And so what we need to do is, all right, so let's talk about what do you in this role at work, here are the expectations of the role, and this is what do you understand that, making sure they're clear, and do they agree to that, and beyond that even say, and if we come to a certain milestone and we're not in alignment with that, how are we going to handle that? Right? Those are very mature adult conversations that very few people have.
Completely appropriate and completely with compassion. Like none of those are violating any human principle. But I totally agree with you. Anytime I've been in a coaching conversation with any leader and they're talking to me about a performance issue, guaranteed 100% of the time, expectations have not been clearly articulated. And now that's not to say that it doesn't mean the person's still not doing their job. But it is things like, if you haven't done that step, to try to punish or counsel or coach somebody who's not clear on what the goalpost is absolute insanity. And I tried to fix it. We came up with a new standard job description that leaders could download. And the job, this is for any role, and every leader in the country wanted to download this. And the job description was read my mind, predict the future, bend time and space, right? Like that's all I'm asking for. My expectations are now clear. And so, right. But the fact is, unfortunately, that didn't work. We sold a lot of them, but it just didn't work. But you're right. It's so now, and now eventually though, you do get to a point where you have been clear. You're like, okay, these are the outcomes. These are the behaviors. These are the competencies, whichever model you want to use there. Right. So you get there. All right. So let's now run the clock a little more further. We've clarified expectations. There's unity on that. There's commitment. All right. So the balance sheet, and then the next day turns and they're like, my dog ate it and the internet broke and they're struggling. So now what's the next thing in this playbook? I love this script you're giving us here. I feel like, the method actor, you're like coaching me through a scene.
Well,
here.
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, basically the question is, what kind of guardrails have you put in place up front? So, and the question is, how many opportunities are there for someone to get back into integrity, get back into being accountable? And at a certain point, like you're saying, you could do a certain number of these, but at a certain point, we have a business to run, and the role they've been hired for demands a certain kind of performance. And at a certain point, this is where you get into, let's talk about the consequences of this to the business, to our customers, etc. And again, no shame, no blame. Like, no, again, the thing is, this is hard. Takes a lot of maturity. Is it like, staying calm? What are we going to do? And at a certain point is, okay, at this point, we like what, hopefully your first pass when someone looks like they need help is, how can I be of support? Like, what kind of support do we need to help you? As opposed to, you better get your act together, or else you're out of here in 2 days. Right, that's a threat, right?
You don't get fired on the first strike, right?
No, exactly.
That's usually, I mean, especially in today's labor market where it is really hard to get people in the door. But at 3 strikes or whatever it is. Right?
And I think, and letting people know our process internally. So our process is, hey, this is the first thing, and by the way, this is our process. If there's 2 more, we're going to put you on a formal performance improvement plan or whatever you have internally. And then we're going to talk about that, because we can't sustain a business this way. And then I would also check in, does that make sense? Do you understand? I want to get some feedback from them. What are your thoughts on that? Where are you at? Because we can't just go into that old school model of tell.
Yeah. It's like, hey, I'm doing my best here. Meet me halfway, help me help you, kind of thing. And I, when we get to that point, one of the things that I like to reframe is, I'm just like, look, if it's not working, then we're just not playing to your strengths. And that's an okay, conclusion. That doesn't mean you're a bad human being. Doesn't mean I was a terrible boss. It just meant, this isn't the right situation. So let's all do everybody a favor and unleash them in that sense, right? And the folks that we've had the opportunity to go through that experience, I know I've certainly tried to do it with as much compassion and love and respect as possible. And I think pretty much all the cases, there's probably one out there that would disagree with me, but in all of those cases, when we handle it with that kind of compassion and grace and respect, I get Christmas cards years later from these same people who said, "Hey, thanks so much for doing that for me. I didn't want to go. It wasn't a good experience. And yet I found something better, right? Or it set me up for a new opportunity in life." And so we were not doing them any favors by continuing to drag them. So to me, I still think that's an expression of empathy, right? You're like, wow, how might it feel to be in your situation where you're constantly, not meeting expectations and you feel awful all the time, right? Like I wouldn't want to put you in that, situation either. So those are good guardrails, like you said. There's the first pass, oops, how can I be helpful? There's the fourth strike and, you're out and you're handling that. Now let's zoom into the middle space because that's where most of us spend a lot of our time. And I've got a hypothetical leader who I will not name, but everybody who's listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about. And, he's running a challenge where, he's in that moment. He's doing his best to listen. Maybe he could listen longer. That's probably true. But then he's making a suggestion. He's like, well, did you consider trying X? Or, hey, in this, the recommendation document, could you strengthen the risk section? Whatever it is. And in that moment of offering a suggestion, waterworks. Like they're just imploding on him. And they're like, oh, I've been criticized. I'm a valedictorian. I'm a, top of my class. I've never got anything less than 100% on any quiz exam ever since I was 4 years old. And then they just crumble. So tell us, what's some tips that, because I think some leaders are like, okay, well, how do I handle this one? Right. Like I'm running into this more and more right now. And I think some of our listeners can relate.
Yeah, oh, this is a big one, right? Because I mean, certainly I'm hearing this from leaders too. Is like, oh, these employees, they can't handle any criticism, and hearing about that secondhand, I'd love to actually be a fly on the wall and see that because I don't know if that's actually, because even your example here is like, hey, can I offer some, like, it's like how velvet can my velvet gloves be, right?
I offer a suggestion, you mean it wasn't perfect? And it's like, well, no, but that's my, that's why you're here. Like you just graduated. You've been here 4 months. There's no way you're going to know what I know for 40 years of this, let me help you. Right. Yeah.
And so if I run into people like that, and I coach leaders around this, when I do workshops around giving and receiving feedback, is depending on someone's history with feedback. Feedback is the original F word, right? So for some people, you say, I got some feedback and like their insides clench up because like, oh, I can't, right? And to realize that, hey, and maybe this is something that you learn. Again, we all learn these things through experience, and though it becomes part of the onboarding process of talking about this stuff. But basically, it's, feedback means I'm here to help. Okay, you might have had a different experience somewhere along the way, or no one has ever given you that. But here we have real results, and and if we and helping them, and also being maybe a little vulnerable about your experience, like, hey, if we don't do this and these customers go away, there is no business. We have no payroll to pay you from. So this isn't a given. And I think so often there's this kind of parent-child dynamic in organizations where think that we have to manage, like put all this weight on our shoulders and think that we have to manage all this and then just tell them. And that, as opposed to, we're struggling here, folks. We've got to make cash flow. And like, that's only coming from here. And you're a piece of that and helping people to understand how they fit into that. And so I'm going to jump in at times and just to know this isn't about you personally. It's about the performance of this role. And I'm here to help, because one of the things often, going back to what we talked about, 3 strikes, it may be in the first strike, you discover that, wow, this actually isn't even a people issue. This might be a systems and a process issue, and so often when there's some kind of an issue, the low-hanging fruit is to blame a person. It's like, oh, that they must not know. When in fact, it could be a systems thing. It could be, it's more than likely it's that they didn't, where's that information live? I didn't know that. How was I supposed to know that? And then you start uncovering things and realize maybe it's not just this one person, it's the whole team. And then you have bigger fish to fry. So I would start with this sense of we've got to do a lot of leading and teaching at the same time, continuously teaching people because we want to educate people to become leaders in their own way. They may not be the CEO, but about becoming leaders and empowering them to understand how the pieces fit together. And I think this is the essentially human part of what's left for us as human leaders is we have to help people to integrate and synthesize all these aspects because one of the other things that we know is that people will do a lot more towards work when they have a clear sense of purpose of what it is, when it matters to them. And all that takes time. All of that takes time, and we can't, like you said before, we can't ask them to read our mind, right? We can't ask them to bend time and space. What we can do is have some honest conversations about what's going on.
Well, I really like how you mentioned taking a moment to really define or maybe even reframe what does feedback even mean, right? Feedback's actually a very powerful love language. It's a sign of compassion. It's a sign of care. It's a sign, if I didn't think about it, if there's somebody that you don't care a lick about, like you really have it in for them, you just want to just get them out of your life. Who in their right mind would take the time to give that person feedback? No, like you would, in fact, you would withhold it. That would be, you'd be like, I want to see you completely face plant. So the act of courageously offering feedback and the act of curiously receiving it in and of itself is a great connection to establish. But I think you're bringing up a key point that many of us might have been raised with that as a value. And so we just take it for granted. And then when we encounter folks that maybe weren't raised with that, we're confused. We're like, I don't understand. I'm offering you this chocolate covered cricket. And in our culture, that is a sign of high respect, and you're vomiting on it. And I don't understand. And you're like, look, in my culture, a chocolate covered cricket ain't a delicacy, baby. So I think reframing it, as part of the onboarding. And then I think we consistently, because it is true. I think our educational systems have done a real number. You talk about it's not a people problem, it's a process problem. Our educational system is training people to think that, feedback and failure is a sign of a fatal character flaw versus the building blocks to success. And so I think for leaders who are facing that, that's our message is maybe you got to do a little homework to create the capacity for that kind of exchange. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, okay. So then now we've done the work, we've reframed feedback, we're showing up in a compassionate way. What's the fruit of this sustained investment? So anchor us on when you've seen organizations and individual leaders within organizations create pockets. What's the outcome? What are the rewards that we can all look to receive?
Well, for one thing, I think what you're getting is you are getting people who care about the work. So some of the fruit is engaged employees, and top quartile versus bottom quartile engagement, higher levels of profitability, productivity, lower levels of turnover, higher levels of retention. So you're going to get all those benefits, right? Because people care. The other thing, though, you're going to run a much more effective enterprise because when people are accountable, it helps you to align your strategy with the execution of that strategy. And so this sense of alignment, and so suddenly things are just clicking better. You're better able to serve your customers, bring in new prospects and convert them in whatever part of the business process you're dealing with, you're able to do that more effectively.
Even in accounting, right?
Even in accounting. Absolutely. So lots of fruit to be born from this integration of empathy and accountability.
Yeah. And we're talking micro doses here, right? 90 seconds there, 90 seconds there, 20 minutes there, 10 minutes there. And then again, how it shows up in your tone of voice, not waving the hand and rolling the eyes, all those body languages. And it's, I think to your point, it's far more accessible, but it will be awkward at first. And it does take some time to develop the mastery of that as well, too, just like any other skill. Well, this has been very practical, man. We have gone, deep from the Industrial Revolution all the way to the modern, Gen Z educational structure. Good coverage on a very narrow topic. For those who are inspired by what you shared today, where can people connect with you and find out more about the other things you're working on?
Awesome. Well, certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. Alain, Alain Hunkins, Hunkins. You can also check out my website, which is alainhunkins.com. There's links to my speaking, coaching, training pages. I do some other things as well, but you can definitely, those two places are good resources for all the leadership stuff that I'm currently doing.
And is there a good platform for getting your book, Cracking the Leadership Code?
Really, it's on every platform. Amazon is an obvious one, but it's pretty much wherever books are sold, you can find it.
Okay, excellent, excellent. No, that is fantastic. Well, thank you again for sharing a couple decades of your practical experience, which has been concentrated by all of these different contexts. Really appreciate you sharing these insights. Thanks for being on the show.
Lee, it's my pleasure. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.